so we probably have to make a distinction between, a Genizah in theory and the practice that, that is proposed for it by the rabbis. And it's not mentioned that often, but you can see, for instance, in the Mishnah Shabbat talks about, so we often quote this bit from Mishnah Shabbat where it says what you can do on Shabbat and what you should do. And it says, Kol Kitvei Kodesh, Matzlim Otam Mipnei Leka. Right, so
translate that
so all holy writings should be saved from fire. So it should be saved from destruction.
So the background of that is that there's two prohibitions in rabbinical literature about Shabbat. One is you can't start a fire, and the other is you can't put out a fire. So if you're saving a holy book from the fire, if it was a secular book, that would be a violation of Shabbat.
Yes.
But a holy book, you're safe from the fire.
And it's kind of up there with the idea of saving lives on holy days, when you're not supposed to do any work, but you're allowed to jump in and save someone from a pit, or and it's the same. And so they almost equate the idea of holy books, which they don't define. So they say Kitvei Kodesh, holy writings. They don't actually say whether that's because it's got the Tetragrammaton in it, the Shem Hashem, or whether it's it's a book because there are books of the Bible without the Shem Hashem in it,
like Esther, for example.
Like Esther.
Okay.
Or whether it and probably at different times and by different communities, the idea of Kitvei Kodesh has been taken in different ways. But anyway, it kind of equates that with saving human life. And so the idea is that you should drop everything and you should save holy writings. It does say B'chol Lashon, so whichever language they're written in.
Really?
And it says Bein she korin bahem uvein she enam korin bahem. So whether you read them or not. So the implication there is whether they're holy to you or not. So maybe they are, a different branch of Judaism, or maybe even, if they're holy to Muslims or Christians, they're still the Abrahamic God.
Okay, so we have to unpack that, because another way of understanding whether you read them or not might be exactly what we're talking about. It's so old you don't read out of it anymore. So whether it's still in use or not still in use, that's one possibility. And you're saying the other possibility is, well, maybe it's not your sacred text or your branch of Judaism. Let's say something written by the Dead Sea Scroll community, the rabbis, or we have the example of Ben Sira, which we'll get to, I think. It's unclear whether they read from it or not. I guess they probably did. Okay, so, all right, interesting. So you save them from the fire, and so how does that connect to a Genizah?
So, and then it says, and then you should subject them to the laws of Genizah.
Okay.
And
because they've been damaged by fire.
And so you should then put them away. And so that's Genizah in theory, but the Cairo Genizah in practice. So this chamber that was in the Ben Ezra synagogue, and although we call it the Ben Ezra synagogue, in the Middle Ages it had a completely different name. So nowadays it is known as the Ben Ezra synagogue, and it's a tourist site in the oldest part of the city of Cairo.
So people can go visit it today?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, it's kind of on the because for start, the fortress of Babylon, the heart of old Cairo. It's actually the city.
You said the fortress of Babylon?
Fortress of Babylon. That's the sort of walled city.
That's called the fortress of Babylon?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But Babylon's in Iraq, so why is it called the fortress of Babylon?
Persians are supposed to have, so sort of people who came from the east and supposed to have founded it.
Okay.
It's a Roman city in its sort of. So the synagogue is in the heart of what's known as Al-Fustat. Al-Fustat was the first Islamic capital of Egypt. So when the Muslims captured Egypt, they camped at Fustat and they built their first sort of big city there, and that grew to be the capital. In the 10th century, when the Fatimids came, the Fatimid Empire expanded from North Africa, so Muslim Empire. They conquered Egypt, which they had long wanted to do. And in the 960s, they conquered Egypt, and they decided to found a new city celebrating that, and they founded Cairo, a little bit north of the old city.
Okay.
Now, as Cairo's expanded, of course, now it's a huge mega city. It's completely encompassed Fustat, but Fustat used to be a separate city.
Okay.
And it used to be the most important administrative centre in Egypt, and was long after Cairo was founded. Cairo is where the caliph and then the sultan lived, and the army sort of, and the Islamic administration and the emirs and the highest echelons of Islamic society lived Whereas all the people associated with the previous regime and with the administration of it under previous Islamic regimes lived in Fustat, and they were Christians and Jews for the most part. So it's a very Christian city. So there was a synagogue in Al Fustat, which nowadays is known as Ben Ezra, but in the Middle Ages was one of two Jewish synagogues within the walls of the old city of Fustat. The city of Fustat was there before the Muslims conquered it. It was a Roman town for a long time. It was a port city because it sat right on the Nile. And you can see that there's two big round towers at the entrance to Fustat that are now churches, or one's a church and one's a ruin. And the railway runs right in front of the old city of Fustat. Now, the railway actually follows the course of the Nile. So the Nile used to run right in front of it, but because the Nile silts up and moves over time, it's actually moved away from Fustat. So you don't get the feeling that this was a maritime city, but it was really, because it sat right on the Nile as a port. And between those two round towers was a canal that went to the Red Sea.
So currently, and I've never been to that part of Egypt, so currently the Nile doesn't run through this area,
sort of,
part of...
It's moved to the west.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. Okay. It's still, within, you can probably stand the tower and see it, but there is now a railway that follows the exact route that the Nile ran.
Okay.
And there used to be a canal that ran through the middle of the city. So it was a port city canal that connected the Nile with the Red Sea. So very important town in Egypt. And the Jews had two synagogues. The Jewish community of Fustat had two synagogues within those walls. So as part of the oldest part, the synagogue of the Shami'in, so there's of the Syrians, the Palestinians, however you want to translate Asham, the Levantines. And
Shams is Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, the Palestinian territories, and Jordan today, right?
And it's an Islam. When the Muslims took that part of the world, that was their administrative division. They created Asham, and it doesn't fit with the modern geography of Syria and Palestine. So we say Syria hyphen Palestine or something like that. So that's but it was also known as the synagogue of the Jerusalemites. So in Arabic, this would be Kanisat, like Kanisa, which means synagogue in Arabic, like Knesset, Kanisat Ashami'in, or Kanisat Yerushalmi'in. And then the other synagogue, which was built it appears right next to a Christian church, of which there were many in Fustat, known as the Hanging Church, was the synagogue of the Iraqi'in, of the Iraqi Jews, so the Babylonian Jews.
Okay.
Now that synagogue, by all accounts, was originally a church that was purchased from the Christian community in the 9th century.
Really?
Because the Iraqi Jews arrived later. The Palestinian Jews were already there. They were the largest congregation in Fustat. But many Iraqi Jews left the Abbasid Empire. They settled in North Africa. They followed in the footsteps of the Fatimids, and eventually they came to be the majority in Egypt, but not originally. So the oldest synagogue in Fustat, and perhaps one of the oldest synagogues in Egypt, is the Kanisat Ashamiyin, so what became the Ben Ezra synagogue. So when we talk about the Cairo Genizah, we mean the storeroom of that synagogue in the oldest part of the capital city of Egypt. And unlike the normal principles of Genizah, when this was opened up by Solomon Schechter, and probably have to say a bit more about how that happened, what he discovered, to his great surprise, was that it did not contain, Torah scrolls, Siddurim prayer books, copies of the Mishnah and Talmud, right? The holy sort of...
It didn't only contain that.
It didn't only contain that. It had those, but it also contained personal letters, philosophical writings, poetry in huge abundance, not just liturgical poetry, so religious poetry, but also secular poetry and bad poetry, poetry about wine and love for boys, the kind of thing that was in vogue.
Did you say love for boys?
That was, I mean, so love expressed in poetry could be towards, romantic ideals of women, or the idea that they get from Spanish, that you find in Spanish Hebrew poetry, which as well comes from Arabic poetry, is the boy as an object of worship.
And this is men writing about
okay.
Yeah,
it's a kind of ideal love.
Okay. I'm just going to ask, does that mean homosexual love?
Yeah.
Or is it some kind of ideal of, it does, I love my dog, right?
No, it does.
No,
but it's a kind of idealized love, it's a kind of pure love that... And whether or not it actually reflects practice is debatable.
Okay,
but there's a lot of poems about it.
So that's Spain, in the Genizah, even though that's obviously, nobody even then would have considered that sacred.
No.
And is it there because it's written in Hebrew letters and they just threw everything in there?
So this is the big question, because what Schechter, when Schechter emptied out that the storeroom, he said it was a battlefield of books, and you had these strange combinations of you would have a pious rationalistic text arguing against superstition and magic, and stuck to it was an amulet. Which well,
that's why you needed the text against superstition, because there are amulets.
Yeah, sought angels' power to protect you against bad luck or whatever it was.
Okay.
And we don't know why this happened, but there are a number of things that are worth bearing in mind, and you have to sort of adopt the medieval mindset, because what we're talking about is text so this synagogue was active from the 10th century, maybe earlier. We don't really know. The building itself dates from about 1040, but it was built on an earlier building that was destroyed by the Caliph al-Hakim. And they immediately rebuilt it when he died.
Did they take the contents? I guess this is the big question.
Yeah.
Did they take the contents of the Genizah from the earlier synagogue into the 1040
We
synagogue?
assume so.
Okay.
We assume so because we have a lot of material that predates the 11th century.
Mm-hmm.
So this synagogue was active from probably at least the 10th century all the way through to the 19th century, when Solomon Schechter, a scholar from Cambridge, arrived and emptied it out. And over the course of time, maybe originally their intention was, we'll put Torah scrolls in here and we'll put holy books associated specifically with this synagogue. But over time, we got holy books from other congregations. There is material from the Iraqi congregation. There is material from the Karaite congregation. We have these strange survivals of Dead Sea sect works in there. But also all of this, what we would regard as purely secular literature. And in sort of the medieval mindset, of course, it's very difficult to distinguish secular from religious, because practically everything you write in the Middle Ages invokes God in some degree. So if you write a letter to someone, whether it's in Arabic or Hebrew or Aramaic, you will, near the beginning, you will say, in the name of God, or you will say, God bless you, whatever. We have letters where Sir Solomon ben Judah, the head of the Jews in Jerusalem, falls out with an arch rival who attempts to usurp his position as head of the Jews. Yeah. And he describes him in one letter. He describes him as the suspect. He doesn't want to name him because he so hates him. But he says, God kill him.
Wow.
Yeah. Yemito ha'el. Yeah.
Wow. That's literally a curse.
Yes.
And so but because he mentions God there, so that actually makes sense why that would show up there.
Yeah.
But the the love poetry, so there's a whole other genre, which is like administrative texts of like merchants and things like that. Right, so there's all these merchants' letters. So how'd those end? Like those entire archives of merchants, how'd those end up in there? Or why did they end up in there?
Well, again, I mean, even a bare bones kind of economic document, something that represents a financial transaction will often invoke God. So we have what are proto checks. We have these orders of payment that say. Wow. And we have them written by various different people, but we have a large number by one particular trader. Called Abu Zikri Cohen. So he had an Arabic name. He's a Jew living in an Arabic-speaking land. So he adopts an Arabic name, but his name is Judah. So Abu Zikri Cohen, and he writes these checks that very similar to modern checks. They say pay to the bearer, may the banker, and it names the banker Abul Khiyar. Is pay to the bearer the sum of 2 dinars or whatever, and then it will also on the note write the number 2 as a numeral, so like a modern day check, like yesterday's check, right? You write out the numbers in words and in numbers, right? It's a kind of security feature. Right. It's the same on these, but at the top of it will have often a bet, right, which is short for either it'll have a bet, or sometimes it'll have a be'emet or something. So it will have some kind of invocation of God. So it'll be Be'ezrat El, or it'll be in some kind of implying that God is guaranteeing this transaction, right?
Kind of like an American coin saying "God we trust."
Yeah, exactly. And so
God we trust, but pay cash.
I've got it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No. No.
It's a bit ironic, right?
This is paper money, and this is. I mean, what they're paying is it's a promise to pay because of the difficulties of moving large amounts of gold and silver across borders, which was tricky. I mean, it's tricky. as a Jewish merchant carrying around large amounts of money when there were bandits everywhere.
Right.
But also it was a bit tricky for Jews rather than Muslims to move large amounts of money around under Muslim rule.
Okay.
But also the distance involved. They were trading with India.
Oh, wow.
You didn't want to, send vast amounts of cash between.
Wait, so you're saying a merchant could take this promissory note or sort of check and bring it to India, and
Yeah, there would be some Jewish banker there who would be able to.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and these notes could then be traded.
And you mean literally
Yeah.
India?
Yeah, literally.
From Egypt.
Yeah.
That's
The west
amazing.
coast of India. Jews settled there and had factories producing bronze
Wow.
and sending it back to Egypt. There was a whole
Wow.
Indian Ocean trade route in the 13th
Wow.
century, which most of our information comes out of the Genizah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so getting ahead of myself a bit, but so you can't write something without the name of God. So even a shopping list, right? So we have a shopping list written by Judge Elijah, a judge from.
Wait, we literally have a shopping list.
Oh, we have loads of them. Yeah. So we have a shopping list written by Judge Elijah, who was active in the 13th century in Egypt. And it says, at the top, it says expenditure for, and it's in Arabic, in Hebrew script, because most Jews wrote their Arabic in Hebrew script.
Mm-hmm.
And it says expenditure for the festival of Shavuot, if I live that long, with the help of God. And so it's
Okay.
in Arabic, so the expenditure is nafaka or whatever, but at the end it's Be'ezrat Shaddai, right? So with the help
In
of
Hebrew.
the Almighty in Hebrew.
Not in Judeo-Arabic.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
well, it's it's Hebrew words in a Judeo-Arabic sentence.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I see. So it's kind of like if you have a Hebrew word in Yiddish, is it Hebrew or is it Yiddish?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. And
I see what you're saying.
And you can argue whether this is code
Right.
switching or whether this is
Right.
this is
Well, I mean,
learning.
so how would you say be'ezrat with the help of in Arabic? Bisa'ad or
It says
something?
so he missed to. Yeah, something like that, I guess.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
you
and they
could-
would say Allah,
yeah,
but
okay.
yeah.
So he's, well, okay, so
I mean, you
using
might say
Shaddai-
inshallah or something in
okay.
Arabic. It would
So-
be quite common. to say
Oh,
something like
that's a
that,
whole
yeah.
other maybe can of
Yeah.
worms. But do they refer to God as Allah
Yes.
in this Judeo-Arabic? The Jews refer to God as Allah.
When Maimonides, so Grace Think of Middle Ages, writes about God, he will often, in one of his philosophical contexts, he will call him Allah. When a teacher sends a note home of a schoolboy who's been bullied at school, it's in Judeo-Arabic, Arabic and Hebrew characters, but it's between two Jews, and he says, "God bless you" at the top of it, and that's Allah, right?
and that's an actual example of a letter sent home to a...
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
And so it's not only
There were even bullies in the Middle Ages. Well, I guess we knew that, but wow.
Yeah. This
Okay.
no, it's a fantastic little note. It's just a little note that that says your son basically, or the child has been getting on very well in his reading, or is it writing? I can't remember. Anyway, and unfortunately, the another boy in the class conspired with the other kids to break his writing board because they don't have tables. You sit on the floor.
Okay.
And you have a board on your knees, and you use that to write on.
Yeah.
And so the other kids broke his writing board just to teach him not to shine in class, I guess.
Wow. Man.
Yeah.
Things haven't changed.
No.
Okay.
But that gets preserved in the Genizah, and that's a little piece of really ephemeral writing, right? Because that's of interest to no one other than the boy and his guardian, right?
Well, today it's got to be interesting to historians of what life was like in the Middle Ages.
Exactly. That's why the Genizah is so important, because in addition to preserving some of the best copies and earliest copies of important Jewish text, the main Jewish religious texts and lost works and so on, it also preserves an amazing archive of everyday life of a kind that's not preserved in other archives, because these were not deliberately put for posterity. They just felt they couldn't throw them away. Well, they had the name of God in. They're written in Hebrew characters, so even most of their Arabic writing is done in Hebrew characters, because Jews went to school to learn Hebrew. They didn't learn Arabic at school. They spoke it at home. So when they came to write as adults, even the greatest scholar of the Middle Ages, Moses Maimonides, the greatest Jewish scholar of the Middle Ages, writes his Hebrew in his Arabic in Hebrew characters. So it's written in Lashon HaKodesh, written in the Holy Language. So maybe, if God chose to transmit the Bible, to the Jews in the Holy Language, maybe I shouldn't throw this piece of paper away that's written in that sacred language.
I mean, technically, it's not the Holy Language; it's the Holy Script. But
Yeah.
I guess they would, like when I was a kid and we would study the Talmud, they would, talk about reading the Hebrew Well, now I know that it was, most of what I was reading was Aramaic,
yeah.
but we didn't make that subtle distinction because it was in Hebrew letters, right?
Yeah.
So that's a similar sort of thing what you're saying. So.
Yeah, and so they do refer to Judeo-Arabic, so Arabic in Hebrew characters, they do refer to it as Arabic, but sometimes they have to be very clear and distinguish, do you mean Arabic in Arabic characters? He says, ktiva, to mean the writing, because sometimes that we have one or two letters where they say things like, I need to write to so-and-so, do you know, does he read Arabic? And what he means is, does he read Arabic script? Because everyone can read Judeo-Arabic, because they can all read Hebrew and they can all speak Arabic.
Okay.
But not everyone can read Arabic script in the Jewish community. That's
very
a
cool.
skill by the kind of, your parents had to sort of, pay a bit extra to get you Arabic tuition for that, intending that you'll go and work in the Islamic government or something. Anyway, so they keep it because it's got the name of God on it. They keep it because it's in Hebrew script. Maybe they keep it just because they don't like to throw away anything written down, because the Jews are a highly literate society, far more literate than their neighbours, the Christians. And so perhaps that's why they put things in, rather than let these things be wasted, they put them in the Genizah. But also there is possibly just a sense of, what the Genizah is lots and lots of different archives. So at some point, like the great merchant Abu Zikri, say, he dies and people clear out his house. And, as a merchant, he would also be a scholar, because he would have been educated to a certain degree. So he would have copies of books of the Bible. He will have poetry to recite. He will have prayer books. He will have, Mishnahs and Talmuds to study. And do they really want to sort through all that stuff from his shopping lists and his personal letters and the doggerel he wrote about, love or whatever? No, they may just take it all and deposit that in the synagogue. Or maybe it was the beadle of the synagogue whose job it was to sort it out. Maybe the beadle wasn't the most educated member of the Jewish community, which is possibly quite likely. Who knows? But anyway, for whatever reason, they put it all in the Genizah.